So who's to say that they're gonna spend the money the way they think is gonna work, not the way the students want it? So I think that's where you were trying to go with it, is that it makes the transparency on how money is being spent, which we've had problems with currently through this semester, it's not gonna be there at all, because they're gonna be performing their jobs, who are controlled by these administrators, who are being, paid for by this money that's our money that we're not gonna be able to have control of how it's being spent. So I think that whole circle, there's no transparency at all for there to be student input on our money that we're spending. I feel like the Student Activity Center is, yes, I think it's necessary, but ASUN still, I feel like needs to be that checks and balance that is there to be like, okay, well, yes, you guys shouldn't be spending this much money on this event because it's unnecessary and it failed in the past. Like, that's why we're here.
Do you guys do that now?
Yeah, we have a budget and finance committee meeting where we approve the
Right,
budget.
and so essentially, I'm just trying to follow it. So the Budget and Finance Committee essentially has more or less oversight over the flip side of it, retroactively. And so if ASUN has a bad event, the Senate says, okay, we don't do that next year. Don't do something, change a different component of it. It'd be the same thing. And so we're essentially saying we're not trying to promote bad programs here. And so I find it interesting that there seems to be this kind of like devious mistrust of the administrator. Administrators in these types of fields are student development specialists. They're trying to help students succeed. They want to see these things flourish on our campus. And so they don't, the administrators, the advisors to the programming entity within student activities would not say, we're not doing this event. They don't have that kind of say in it. Students are hired to perform a job. At the beginning of the year, the Student Activities Center, that fee that is generated, that 1.16 million, essentially what happens, there would be a just similarly to performing arts and the same thing for fine arts and this academic success center, would have a committee of people from across the university. There could be faculty representation, student representation from ASUN, GSA, whatever we like. That committee would meet, and they would decide where all of this money gets spent every year. There is oversight. If they say, okay, we spent $100,000 on programming last year, we didn't spend all of it, it's hypothetical, we didn't spend all of it, or we misspent it, then we'd say, okay, there is a trail of accountability. But we need to proliferate these leadership opportunities. I know I keep saying that. I'm not trying to be repetitive. I'm just saying that ASUN can no longer be the only game in town because we can't do it. And I understand what you're saying in terms of transparency. I don't mean to interrupt you, Senator Hernandez. I understand what you're saying in terms of transparency, but I think I'm just struggling to understand why transparency wouldn't exist. It's not a student government. There wouldn't be open meeting law associated with it or anything like that. But they wouldn't do bad events in the future.
No, I understand where you're coming from, and I'm supportive of increasing student activity because I think it will essentially make the campus better. But my problem is yes, we're holding you accountable, but when you're doing it through ASUN, we can pass law that if it's not followed, there are repercussions. Whereas if we're just having a committee and we're like, well, we think you should spend the money this way because this is what we think, and then you're like, okay, whatever, sure, we'll spend it that way, and then they don't end up doing it.
Sure.
So that's the only problem I have with it. I think it is necessary to increase involvement on campus, but in the way that it's proposed this way, I don't know if it's right.
What I'm talking about is standard practice at every institution that we researched, and this is common on every other campus. So in terms of, let's say, one of the business student council, I don't mean to keep it hard behind you, but business student council has an event, for example. Where's that line? I mean, there's not 100% accountability and transparency in everything that everyone at this institution does. There just is. What we're talking about is measured accountability. Measured accountability. If the advisor for that programming board is producing very poor events, if that person's advising them in very bad ways, not doing a good job, that person loses their job. They're not a good advisor. We'll find someone else. When we do these kinds of hiring, we did a search for the assistant director of student activities for programming. I believe it was a year ago, I want to say, and we got tremendously qualified people. These people want to go out and they want to see students have great events on campus. They want to see that campus life be expanded dramatically. And so, in terms of accountability, I think that it's a difficult mindset to break out of. This will not be a student government. We're not recreating a student government here. We're creating a campus entity whose sole responsibility is carrying out leadership development and all of these other things that we're talking about. And so in terms of student input, pick students at large to have an advisory council for it. I mean, we can come up with ways like that. But what we're talking about is giving students the opportunity to go out and program, not an ASUN. Because it's really important. Having it be funded in a different entity. Can you honestly say that Flipside has the budget to program to the entire campus in the way that it's done at other universities?
We have quite a list.
Sure, hey, go for it.
But we'll get to you, Director Steinberg. Senator Keeley, did you have something?
Yeah, I don't think that this is as revolutionary of a change as people are kind of considering it. As far as kind of from a functional standpoint, you know, the way that it kind of works now, and I mean, it could be changed depending upon your budget and finance committee, that's true. But the way that it works now is at the beginning of the year when we do like the initial appropriations with that, you know, and I think that the advantage of the new proposal is that it solidifies that budget from being changed by students, basically. It's a constant budget no matter what. Homecoming's always going to get this funding. You know, Mackey Week's always going to get this funding. And I think that in these committees of students, you're still going to get kids like Casey who, they're not in it for the money. Like, let's be honest. I mean, I work at a law firm 20 hours a week. I still make more than he does in a year. And he's not in it for the money. He's in it to, you know, succeed as a student program. And so, I mean, I don't think that that's an issue. There is an advantage also is that if it's more kind of under the jurisdiction of a faculty administrator, they can kind of more swiftly give someone a boot. If they're not towing the line within homecoming, you know, and homecoming's 3 weeks away, they can boot them. You know, it's kind of a lot harder for us to do that as a student government. But kind of on the critical side, you know, the issue is whether or not you trust this jurisdiction to a faculty administrator. I'm not so sure that I do myself, but I think that that's what this ultimately boils down to, and that's something that everyone has to decide.
Senator Anderson.
I personally think that we have enough money to support the student activities for the most.
You have inactive clubs out there. How do we engage those? We know obviously we don't have the resources to do it now. We need to change something. Something here needs to change. And so what we're talking about doing is putting the right infrastructure in place to facilitate that change. Get students more fired up about these issues, get them coming out to events, have them take a leadership position on campus. That's what fundamentally this is about. And so in terms of accountability among student activities, they get paid. They're a university department. They have to follow the same university accounting principles that the university does now. They can't violate that procedure. I mean, these are very rigidly controlled things by the controller's office. That's why they're called the controller's office. And so they do limit what you can and can't do with certain money. If this committee allocates something to a certain line for travel or general operations, whatever, this is a university department we're talking about. Let's be clear about this. We're not recreating ASUN. We don't want to. We want to jettison the things that ASUN has historically done, which student governments should not be doing. Student government shouldn't be running publications. We don't have the money. And you know what? Hypothetically, if we wanted to re-emphasize something like, if we wanted to have $100,000 for leadership development, we want to have more money for the Unity Commission, all those kinds of things, it's a zero-sum game. It has to come from somewhere. Every year, ASUN is encumbered by 17 different programs and services. And so what that does is it limits innovation. It limits us to go out and expand in any kind of new or different direction. That's what we're talking about doing here. We're talking about giving people, student leaders on campus, the latitude to be able to facilitate a lot of this kind of stuff.
Speaker Jeremiah, you're next.
Okay, I have a question and then I have some follow-up. The Unity Committee, or the Commission, and the Fish Committee, I don't even know what that is. Then we have a coordinator for Judicial Council and Senate, which is a conflict of interest in itself, and Club Commission, and Legal Services. All those 4 entities under one coordinator.
It's the coordinator of student government, correct?
So, and then we have a coordinator of technology, which would be great and fine, but we don't need it. It's not something that I will fight. That's me. That's the end. Oh, and we have over $550,000 just going to administrative